Cool. Hey everyone. I was trying to settle on a name. The title said like choosing, was it like Showdown between 10 local development environments, but I didn't really know how many I was going to test. The other thing I want to warn was that I don't recommend you go and test 10 different environments because what happens, it can really screw up your computer. I'll cover it a little bit, but you don't realize like every time you're installing an environment, it's like modifying configuration files, etc. So just try one, stick with it, and I'm going to try to help guide you on an option. Cool. So real quick about me, I'm the lead software engineer at Dow Jones for the Wall Street Journal editorial program. I'm recreating with Gutenberg our brand new CMS that will also reflect the London Times, News UK, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm the founder of an abstract agency, which is abstractwp.com. That's my small marketing agency outside of Dow Jones. And I do mostly WordPress marketing with WordPress. I'm a mentor at Thinkful, Code Nation, and All Star Code. So I teach for Thinkful, it's adults, but Code Nation and All Star Code, I'm teaching young men and women of color who are not well represented in the tech community how to code. And then finally, I'm a co-organizer of the WP NYC meetup. So I help Steve, and I guess for the last year now, I've been running the camera. So I'm the camera guy. So if you see me, that's me. And recently, I'm the proud papa of my dog. That's Cheddar Bay Biscuit. So I go back. I'm gonna put these slides on Twitter, by the way. I honestly tweet my slides, so I'm not gonna just say that, it will happen. So that's my dog that I just got. So he's awesome. He's a long-haired Chihuahua from Georgia. Okay, cool. And if anyone wants to get a photo of this or write this down real quick, if you could just tweet, tag, or give some emotional support. Also, Dow Jones likes to see that I am actively involved in the WordPress community, so help me stay employed. I appreciate that. Cool. And then finally, this is 100% my personal and professional opinion. If I steer you towards anything and it blows up your life, I don't apologize. I'm warning you. Cool. The one thing to keep in mind is and I'm going to give you some information, but there's a lot of information out there. And the one thing I stand by this so much, good artists borrow, great artists steal. So if you find, I kind of see it as see if there's RT Camp's one of them, 10 Up, Big Byte, the WordPress VIP agencies, just look at what they're doing, and that's what I did. I essentially just looked at some of the big agencies and said, what are they doing, what's out there, and how can I kind of copy, borrow, and see how I can improve my own skills. So a lot of this stuff I actually borrowed from some of them. Cool. So local WordPress tools. Why would you, raise your hand real quick if anyone here works directly on their live site all the time. Don't be shy, raise your hand high so you can see it. Ooh, okay, cool, that's fine. Only 3 of you, which is pretty good. So if you've been to the help desk, you'll hear Mervin or myself say, or or Ali or anyone who's we'll say hey, can you make sure that I don't want to touch your live site. I'm not comfortable doing this. Can you back it up? Can you make a change? Can any of these things? So with a local environment, we're actually setting up WordPress on our local computer. And the benefit of that is it's low risk, meaning you can work, try all the plugins and tools and configurations that you want. You have complete control. So you don't have to beg GoDaddy to upgrade to version 7 of PHP. You're not locked into PHP 5 and waiting for 2 years for it to happen. Offline access. If you travel a lot, you can travel and you can even get as crazy as installing something called airplane mode, where it won't even dial externally for files in WordPress. But it also works faster when you're offline. I like to do that sometimes, and it saves your battery. Experimentation. So with a local install, you can do as many, and there's a lot of times on a WordPress website, and I don't recommend you doing it on your live site. People will try things on their live site, and they're like, oh, I tried something on my live site and it broke it and it got hacked. So I hate WordPress now. And I'm like, well, if you try a local environment, you don't have to hate WordPress. You can just, experiment as much as you want. And it's the same thing, like you don't try a set of tires on your car. You don't try a set, you don't try new airbags. Like it is a tool, right? And so, and especially if you're making any kind of money you're living or you like your WordPress website, I do not recommend working the live site. So what's included in a local environment? Linux, Apache, MySQL, some flavor of PHP, and WordPress. LAMP. The LAMP stack, correct, right? And who here loves Linux and knows how to use Linux? Raise your hand. Wow, okay, cool. I thought it was going to be no one. So yeah, right. Linux is a little hardcore, right? It can be difficult to configure. It's not Mac and it's not PC, it's Linux, right? And to set that up on your computer, it's a lot of work. And you don't have to do that, and I'll get to that in a second. Some other tools that I like that come with some local instances are WPCLI. So WPCLI, and I'll get into that in a little bit, are like commands that you can run that simplify your workload. So for example, if you guys have ever tried to delete like hundreds of posts on a WordPress website, it's like really tedious. With WPCLI, you can run a command and pass it an argument and say like delete all posts with the category of XYZ, or delete posts between this date and this date. And you run that command and it deletes it instantly, which is why I don't recommend doing a live site, because you're going to make a typo or a mistake someday. I like Composer. I'll cover that a little bit. I'm not going to get too deep into that. NPM. By the way, like the biggest complaint for people like on WP Engine, like you don't allow Composer or NPM. You shouldn't be using Composer or NPM and having unbuilt files in your server anyway. So you build locally and you deploy remotely, which if you're not a developer, don't worry about it, but I'm just saying these are things you can do. Configuring Xdebug. So if anyone here has worked in PHP, in JavaScript you can debug via the debug console in Chrome, right? When you right click and inspect or whatever. PHP requires a different set of tools, and one of those is Xdebug. If you've ever set up a local environment and if you want to like give yourself a headache, go and try to set up Xdebug. But some of the environments that I'm going to recommend, they automatically configure Xdebug to work with your IDE. And another thing I love is, and again, if this means nothing to you and you're just like a designer, that's fine. This is more for like if you're an advanced developer, you can hot swap Nginx, Apache, PHP, and MySQL versions. So you can swap between different versions of PHP and to try things out. And then, that should say, that's a typo, it should say live reload and hot module reloading. So live reload and hot, a lot of people don't even realize this, and this is kind of why I like page builders for clients, like if they want a landing page builder. But the reason as a developer I hate landing page builders to build my own pages is that you guys don't realize like every time you're changing a color, you have to like save, click, refresh, right? Live reload, what happens is every time you save the file, it's refreshing the page every second. So you're essentially coding at the speed of thought, which I'll show you guys a demo of that in a little bit. So you might be thinking, wow, Victor, how do I install all that? You're a developer. I may not be, or I'm not, I'm not there yet, man. You don't have to. And I apologize, not really for emojis, but yeah, you don't have to. So here are your local development environment options, and this will install the scary things like Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and WordPress for you. Because even though WordPress says it's a 5-minute install, has anyone seen the meme? And I apologize. I'll use this. I'll use the safe for work version. Draw the flipping owl. Has anyone seen that meme? It's essentially like a person draws 2 circles and then shows you an owl in the next picture, and they just say like how to draw an owl, and it's like the joke is that they didn't tell you how to draw the feathers, they didn't tell you how to draw the eyes, they skipped all these steps. Right. So the WordPress 5-minute install, I call it draw the flipping owl, because they don't tell you how to set up all this other stuff, right? And this takes care of it for you. So the ones I looked at were flavors of, I don't even know if they're owned, I know MAMP, I don't know who owns these, but MAMP, WAMP, and XAMPP. I just put them under the same category because they are these like local environment tools, and they let you choose your ports, and they let you install some basic tools, and they set up the LAMP stack on your computer. But I would say that as far as like a user experience goes, they're a little outdated. And the reason I say that is like we are like, and I try to say to like people, our number one competitor is Domino's, because when you go on Domino's, right, like your $10 pizza, like it has a pizza, and as a New Yorker, it's okay, I won't tell anyone if you order Domino's for your kids or something, they have a pizza tracker, right, and it can like literally show you, and you can cheer on the people that when they put the pizza in the oven, it literally sends you an alert. When like they get out the door with the pizza, it sends you an alert, and you can like tip them extra money, and I don't know if that's to encourage them to drive recklessly or to be like, hey, like get here fast with my pizza. But if a $10 pizza is that great of an experience, you really need, if you're going to be charging $50 to $100 for a piece of software, I would argue it needs to have a better experience than Domino's, which these don't. Desktop server is is a good one out there. I think the UI is all right, but it has a lot of great features that I'll cover. Local by Flywheel, which is the one that I have on my computer, and I'll explain why I didn't destroy everything, but that's what I'm going to use for this demo. This is a new one, WP Engine DevKit, but this requires, it is strictly CLI. The user interface is the CLI, and I'll cover that in a little bit. Varying vagrants. So VVV, and if you go into the WordPress community and WordPress open source, most of the time they recommend varying vagrants. And again, it has a lot of great features, and I'll cover that as well. And then finally, you can roll your own local environment using Docker, which, to let you know, like that's what Local by Flywheel uses Docker, WP Engine DevKit uses Docker in the underlying architecture, but they make it so that you don't have to deal with Docker. And I don't recommend you deal with Docker. Unless you have a job where you're being paid to deal with Docker, do not deal with Docker. Just don't. It's not for the faint of heart, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Cool. So the way I'm going to review this is I'm going to give you guys on like a scale of 1 to 5, like how these things work, and I'll go over a demo. And what I'm going to review are these things: installation and configuration of the environment, how easy it is to start a brand new project in that environment, migration from the server. So how do we pull our site down from the server? Deployment to the server, so how easy, because what's the point of working locally if we can't deploy it to a live server, right? So that's why we want to do this. And you don't have to, you can just like test things out and then do it, repeat the process, but it's a lot easier to have migration and deployment. And then integration with local tools. So some of these environment tool things, they require you to use their stuff. Like I've seen, like oddly, there's some tools where they have an IDE included in, and none of these do, but they have an IDE included. I'm like, I want my IDE, I want my computer, I want my I don't want to buy like this suite of tools. And then finally, I'll cover some advanced options and different things that you can do. Cool. So let's talk about installing and configuring the environment. So what I did was I essentially ranked these on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'll show you guys like I'll cover some of these. So MAMP, WAMP, ZAMP, the reason I gave it a 3 on a 1 to 5, 1 being the easiest, was that when you use one of these, if you have any kind of port conflicts, you have to reconfigure your ports. What do I mean by that? If you're using anything like Time Machine, if you're using any kind of thing like Plesk at home, if you're using any kind of like servers on your local computers, you may not realize it, but it may have reconfigured your ports. So when you install ZAMP, WAMP, or one of these, you will run into port issues, and it's going to tell you to modify a port. If you're not comfortable modifying ports and like diving into CLI, it can seem very scary. And also, you might break your Plesk server, in which case movie night's ruined. So maybe you don't want to do that, right? I gave desktop server 2. None of these got a 1 as far as installing and configuring. And the reason I gave desktop server 2 is I find the interface a little cumbersome, and I'll actually show you guys. I'm not going to set it up here. It's $100 a year, but you guys can even see like from the website, if you guys go to like install it, it is this branding, these graphics. It literally looks like and I'll zoom in here. I guess you can't zoom on Firefox, but it looks like an old. It looks like a Mac. I don't know, like a 2016 application or something. Which is fine, but it's not that great, and it could be a confusing UI. Installation and configuration of Local by Flywheel is great, and I would almost give it a 1, except for that if you have had anything like Docker, like even this morning I had Docker set up for something I was doing at work, And then to prepare for this demo, I turned on my Flywheel and everything wasn't working. And I had to go and edit a hosts file. And so again, if you have any kind of like things where you have like other Dockers running for work, you're doing some kind of other development, there can be conflicts and it can be hard to configure. But both desktop server and local, I don't know about WAMP and XAMPP, but desktop server and local by Flywheel both have Facebook groups and great forums. So that's why I really like, that's one of the other things when you're choosing a tool. Go and see if there's a forum in a Facebook group and if people are active in it. You don't want to like go trying to ask your questions down like an empty echo chamber or something. WP Engine DevKit, I give a 4. It was insanely difficult to do. It's in, I think it's out of beta, but if you don't know Docker commands, you will get stuck. So for example, and I'm not really, this isn't like a real command, but like if I were to do Docker PS, what happens is like Docker will tell me, oh, let me zoom in by the way. If I run that command, Docker tells me, hey, cannot connect to Docker daemon. But if you don't know Docker commands like Docker PS, are my containers running? There's a Docker destroy command, a Docker stop, a Docker teardown. If you don't know those commands, then DevKit, you'll just get stuck. And that's what happened to me where I was trying to set up local environments via the WP Engine DevKit. In every single one of them, they forgot to write the command that tears down the Docker containers. And I'll explain that in a second what that means, even like if you guys don't know what Docker is. Yeah. And then finally, varying vagrants, I give it a 4 too. It's the same thing as like WP Engine DevKit. It's run via the CLI. But again, with the difficulty levels, I would say like WP Engine DevKit is in beta, but something like varying vagrants, you're going to get the granular level of changes that you want to make. Like so, for example, desktop server and MAMP, they don't make it easy to change your domains, right? That is a lot easier. You can have your domains be whatever you want. For example, like Google now, if you try to use .dev, it flips out, and you could say, you don't know my computer, Google, and you can use varying vagrants and like turn off all that stuff if you want, right? And Docker, I'm gonna give a 5 because like Docker is just literally so let me just explain who doesn't know what Docker is? Like raise your hand if you could like confidently. Okay, cool. So essentially Docker, if anyone ever owned a Mac and then you had to work with a company that had PCs, right? They would make you go and install this thing called Parallels, and it would run a Windows environment on your computer, and it would keep it contained, and you could share files between your two environments, right? That's called a virtual machine. And so what Docker is, it is a containerized virtual machine. So essentially the same way that you could install Windows in parallel with an application called Parallels on your Mac, you can install as many Docker containers on your computer. However, mind you, you're running a computer inside your computer. So when you see me running Flywheel or anything, it's going to sound like my computer's going to sound like a jet engine. It will literally, your fan will be going nonstop. So it eats your battery life. But the benefit is that when you go and install things, you can trash everything, and then you can just remove the Docker and then restart a new Docker. So it's like you don't break your computer. It's essentially separating the environment. And that's one of the benefits of Docker. I'll get to that in a little bit. So cool. So now again, installation configuration, and I'm not gonna run through installation because I don't really feel like installing it on my computer. But any of these, so local by Flywheel, you literally download it, you install it, you enter a password. Same thing with desktop server. You install it. They have a wizard. It has a password. It's very simple, right? But then if we go and look at how to set up Docker, and this is, if you want to play with Docker, there's already a configured Docker from 10 up. It's actually pretty good. But if you look at it, it requires that you have to install Docker. You have to clone it via Git. You have to compose it. Then you have to go and tell it what the names of the databases are. You have to put a password on your database. You have to set the admin credentials via CLI. You have to set up an PHP FPM in your container. And this is like literally all these things. Like you have to configure a YAML file for your Docker. So versus like Flywheel, I click and it's set up. So yeah, so it's not for the faint of heart. And similar to WP Engine CLI, it is WP CLI, it has like, these are the commands that you have to run, or actually, this is what you use brew to set up, but setting up brew in itself can be a huge pain in the ass. Cool. So starting a project in here, right? Like I said, not only is installation and configuration difficult, but when we start a project, right, we want to like set up a new WordPress instance in our computer, right? And so I'm going to go here and like starting a project. I would say that XAMPP, WAMP, it's really easy. It's a 1. Like and I'll show you how easy. In Flywheel desktop server, it's a 1. WP Engine DevKit, again, it's like 10 commands, so I'd give it a 3. Varying vagrants and Docker. Again, Docker, because Docker, you're not just creating a WordPress install, you're creating a full container, and you have to set up the full LAMP stack. So if you see here, I'm actually going to do this right now. I'll start something, and this is how you start a new environment. I'm going to call this WPNYC. This is just a little tip. You can do the default domain is wnyc.test. I do not recommend .test or .local because Macs use they use local for like Time Machine and all these other things, and test. So if you try to do any kind of live reload, you get this weird IPv6 loop feedback, and so it like hangs up and it takes forever to reload. So what and the other thing is, anyone ever use password managers and it maps the domain, then you have to remember your passwords. So I literally just do this. I do local.wnyc.com. So that way, like if my password manager thinks that domain's the real domain, right? And all my other tools that use let's pretend that I have a wnyc.com. It's .org though, right? Oh, okay, so we'll do that, right? And then it chooses the site path, and then you can even set up a blueprint. So I actually have a blueprint here called Migration Ready, and that has like my favorite migration tools, and you can share that blueprint. But again, I'm not gonna use the blueprint just to show you guys, the basic setup. Choose your environment, so I'm gonna hit preferred, and that sets up the latest version of PHP, web server, and then MySQL 5.7. Or I could do custom. Like let's say that we're working on a backwards compatible plugin. I can go and do PHP 5.6 with Apache and an older version of MySQL, right? But just because I want to live life in the fast lane, I'm going to do preferred, right? So I hit continue. I do recommend a secure username and password, but just because like I'm going to delete this right after, I'm going to use WordPress and WordPress. I don't recommend that. Another thing that is included with all of these servers, there's something here called, do you notice it's asking me for my email? I leave that as the email because Flywheel, desktop server, and I think MAMP have a tool called MailHog, and any emails that get sent from your WordPress website in the local environment stay in that local environment. And then you can just experiment and get like all these like fake emails and try, and I'll show you guys how to get that in a second. And then one-click drop down for like a multi-site instance. So I'm just going to hit here, hit add site, and in about 30 to 60 seconds, I will have a full WordPress install. So now if I go to local.wnyc.com, there we go. I have a full WordPress install with the latest WordPress, and I didn't have to do any kind of like, whatever that 5-minute install thing is. I didn't have to name my database. I didn't have to do any of that. It's right in there right now. And that's it. So that's like, starting a project is super easy, and I like it. It's like in Flywheel, like I said, it's super simple, and I'll actually even show you guys. I like to just keep all of mine like in a directory called sites, and they're all right there. Cool. So moving on, let's talk about migration from the server. So how do we get our site off the server? And that's like a lot of people I find what's blocking them from working locally is how to take their website off of a server and pull it down, right? And so for a developer, that's easy. You just FTP in and grab the whole WP content folder and then pull the database, right? But because not everyone's a developer, these tools realize that. I would say, again, MAMP, WAMP, and XAMPP, when I checked, they don't have any built-in migration. They're free tools, but they don't have any built-in migration tools that work directly with your install. Desktop server has something called sync, and you can install a plugin into your remote install, and you can synchronize your install. So that makes deployment a little bit easier. But I found when I was using desktop server, it didn't always work right. It hung up on certain servers. So certain things like GoDaddy, they have a lot of timeout issues. If your client's using some kind of like weird, the hosting company's name is John, he may not have it configured to easily grab stuff. Logo by Flywheel, I gave it 2. I don't know if that's fair because they're trying to get, the way that Flywheel is free is they're trying to get you to install Flywheel. And if you guys see here, on the left here, they want me to click connect to Flywheel. They want me to click add-ons, and then so you can connect to Flywheel and pull, these are 2 people I work with. I could pull this to local and pull it to local, and it will automatically pull the whole site right down to my computer. And then I can even push it back. So you don't even have to use any external tools or coding to make it happen, which is pretty cool.
But that's with Flywheel.
Only with Flywheel, right. So I don't use Flywheel hosting. I use WP Engine.
Well, is WP Engine going to be?
We don't know. That's a question for WP Engine.
All right.
You can ask them at WordCamp.
Yeah, ask them at WordCamp. But they, they built DevKit, which I'm assuming they might continue with. But to let you guys know, DevKit is actually using the CLI to compose Docker containers. Flywheel is a GUI. When I'm clicking this add new install here on the bottom left, it's actually creating a new Docker container every single time. That's what's really cool about local. Your installs won't touch each other. So I can have 30 installs on here and I don't have to worry about them kind of intermingling. Cool. And then in varying vagrant, same thing. I would say it's a 3 because it's more you can install whatever you want. And then as far as how to migrate, and the same thing, Docker, it's a 5 because you literally have to make up how you're going to migrate. So for example, at Dow Jones, we use AWS. And so we don't even we have custom tools to push and pull databases between environments and deploy. And we use something called Jenkins and it's CI/CD. And it's and that's why we need Docker because we can't, it's very difficult to set those things up with these. But again, Docker, I would say is a really difficult thing to do. Did that just beep or was that another beep? That's not my camera, was it?
I didn't hear anything.
All right.
I had a beep when it was
Okay, all right. Guys, you're scaring me. I have to run the camera and on this guy. Let's edit that out. If there's a video on there, we're good. All right. Deployment to the server. So pulling our site down, right? We can pull it with Flywheel, etc. And at the end of this, by the way, on the next slides, I'm going to give you guys some tools so you don't have, if you don't go with Flywheel, or if you use desktop server or MAMP already, there's some tools I'm going to recommend. But same thing, deployment to the server. I thought it's almost the same because with MAMP, WAMP, and XAMPP, I would say the difficulty gets higher because pulling a local install, just dropping the WP content folder into your local WordPress install, and then pulling down the database, that's kind of easy, right? But the one mistake that a lot of people make is that then when they go to move their WP content folder to a host, they forget, they override or delete some of the files. So for example, WP Engine, Liquid Web, some of those hosts, they have their own plugins and tools to help you. But if you overwrite those files, you will break your install. Luckily, they have great support and they'll fix it. But if you don't know what you're doing, you're overwriting files, that could be kind of a nightmare, especially if you're deploying to a live site. Desktop server and Flywheel, again, same thing, a 2. Again, I'm giving Flywheel a 2 because I think it's weird it only syncs to Flywheel. WP Engine DevKit, I gave a 1 because what's really interesting, if you actually take the time to use WP Engine DevKit, it is literally a single command called WPE push and the name of the environment. And it grabs the entire database, all the files, all the stuff, and it pushes it to the named environment via SSH. The only problem with that is you need to make sure that you only allow pushing to a staging environment. I don't know why, but they literally tell you here to they tell you how to set up your prod for push, but I just professionally would never push to prod for my local. Like I would push to QA or staging and then move it to prod. So don't listen to it saying that. But that's really one command, and so as you're making change, and then even it has Git interface where you can map your Git to that command, and so when you do WP push in the environment, it will also push to your GitHub repo to the proper branch. So it's pretty neat. So that's why I gave it a 1. Varying vagrants, again, like a 3, similar to like desktop server. It requires some setup. Docker, again, a 5 because it is not. Don't use Docker, just please. I love it, and again, as an advanced developer, and if you want to get a good job, learn Docker, but it is very difficult. So other options. These are some tools that I recommend. WP Migrate DB Pro integrates with WP CLI, but it allows you to push and pull databases between sites. You can do search and replaces. You can do HTTPS rewrites. You can automatically include media files. It's really great, and it integrates with WP CLI, which I love. And what else does it? It does a couple other things, but it's a really great tool because I don't want to move my files at the same time as my database, so I will use that. All-in-one WP migration is a very simple tool for people who are non-developers. The only issue you run into is timeouts. What it essentially is a plugin that you install on your server, and then it will create almost like a zip file for you to download, and it will put it on your Dropbox, it'll put it on Google Drive, it'll put it wherever you want to grab it, which is great. And then you bring it down, and then you install that same tool on your local, and it installs it. The thing that I don't kind of like about it, it's very difficult to granularly pull down a site. So for example, if I'm working with a client or working with someone and they have a bunch of plugins that I don't want, I will not pull those plugins. And the same thing in all-in WP migration. I set up like a lot of local, like I have plugins that we only use in our local environments, like Query Monitor, UpDevTools, some other things, and I actually don't want those overwritten. The all-in-one WP migration overrides your full install. So you can't kind of like pick and choose your plugins, etc. Yeah. And then there's Updraft Plus. Updraft Plus, like you should be doing this regardless. You can do backups of your site all the time, but Updraft Plus does the same thing. It takes backups. You can take the backup, bring the backup locally, click a button, and it deploys the backup to your local environment. But again, one of the issues you'll run into is Flywheel, desktop server, etc. They've configured things a certain way. So for example, when you, I think it's, let me think, who was I was working with? I think it was on an AWS server, I forget what company it was, but they prefixed the database with something other than WP. And WP Migrate DB Pro warns me, and it says the database that you're pulling is prefixed with something other than WP. When you pull the database, you will have to change the prefix in your WP config file. If you're not a developer, don't worry about it. I'm just saying this for anyone who's using WP Migrate DB. You have to change the database prefix.
They have to match.
All-in-one WP migration will not do that for you. It will not warn you about your database mismatch, so you'll import and you're like, why does this look terrible? Right. Oh, because the databases are differently named.
Excuse me, stay with that updraft for a second. So if you have the updraft zip.
Can we let's keep questions to the end because I do want to keep on time. We're at 8:22. Just give me like 5 more minutes. I'm gonna blow through this. Integration with local tools, right? So the tools that I love, right? CLI. So I want to be able to, I don't want to have to use some kind of GUI. I want like a CLI. And so if you guys see here, I even have like my, I'll go to like this project sandbox. Oh God. And I will go here and I just know this because this is the Flywheel. And there's my full WordPress install. And I like to work in the CLI because I just go right into like, I fire up something like PHP Storm from a single command. And that's, like for me, I like that setup. But when I say that it integrates with the CLI, so desktop server does a similar thing. And you can set this up with like Docker. But if you guys see here, one of the things you may want to do is on your local computer, remember I said before, you may not want to install certain things in your local computer because it could trash your local computer, right? Now remember that Flywheel and DevKit and Docker, they create containers. So our container is protected from everything else, right? So Flywheel, you guys see this like open site SSH? I write, and by the way, like, this is pretty clean, but you can get super advanced dev. I hit open site SSH, and it's telling me that it's going to open my CLI of preference, and now I am inside my box. So that's what I'm inside the Docker container in one click. So I'm actually in Docker right now, and I can run a command. You guys see I just ran the command WP, and that's telling me that WP CLI is there, right? And it's saying manage WordPress through the command line, right? Now if I go back to my own environment, I actually don't have, you guys see that command not found? I don't have WP CLI on my local computer because I don't need it for JavaScript development, right? And so it comes, instead of you guys having to go and configure WP CLI, it's right there. And it also includes Composer and a bunch of other stuff. The other thing is, has anyone ever, remember I spoke about Mailhog before, where you can have your mail come to your computer? Flywheel has this right here for this site, overview. Again, I can see I have Nginx, I have a certain version of this. I can change my domain in one click. I can see my site path. I can turn on and off varnish with a quick click. But one of the things that you may want to do is you may want to use something like SQL Pro, which is a GUI for navigating a database. I click SQL Pro, and Flywheel knows that people like that, and so they let you use the one that you want to use. Flywheel also has, and again, this is why I kind of went with Flywheel, because it was for our team, and when I'm training people, it's the easiest thing to get them up and running with. For example, with DevKit or Vagrant or Docker, we have to go and build this out, and I have to write instructions. And so I can go and choose my terminal. So if you prefer the terminal, iTerm or Hyper. Hyper is another one, and so that's built in as well into local by Flywheel. You can turn on an SSL, which, by the way, if anyone's in a local configuration, creating an SSL in a local environment can be really difficult. I literally just click this button, trust, and it will automatically add a local cert certificate for this instance right now. And so it integrates with those local tools. And then finally, remember I said that Xdebug is really difficult to set up? There's an extension built into Flywheel where it's a one-click setup to configure PHP Storm, or I can set up VS Code with Xdebug. And if you guys ever want to see, again, not for the faint of heart, this is a local install for my company Abstract. This is a GitHub repository. It has a directory structure, but to set up a local environment, it's a really difficult thing to set up. We have Composer, npm, gulp, grunt, etc., and all those commands, and to get all that, and then I think I have Xdebug instructions somewhere here. Again, literally you're just clicking this, and you can then, in Xdebug, it auto-detects it, finds the port and everything, and it takes care of it for you. So a lot of that stuff, and the other thing is too, if you prefer to work in the Finder, you can right-click the site and hit Reveal in Finder. And there I have it. It's right there in my Finder, and I don't have to go and try to figure out where it is, etc. And I know that seems silly, but that to me was one of the simplest things you can do. And then you can clone, export, save as a domain, save as a blueprint. But what I found when I was working with desktop server, man, if anyone is, I don't know if it's changed, but I was using desktop server 4.9. And to make a blueprint, you had to export a blueprint to a special folder in a private directory that and they were don't touch any other files while you're in there. And oh wow, okay, that's not scary. And so, you don't want to do those kind of things. So yeah. So as far as integration with local tools, again, I'm just giving a 3 that's kind of you have to fix it, right? But desktop server, it integrates directly with a lot of these tools that I mentioned. It does similar things to Flywheel. I gave local a 1 just because if you saw, I didn't touch the CLI. All I did was right click and all of a sudden SSH, the terminal of my choice. I could start and stop containers. That's really slick, right? DevKit, I gave it 3 because similar, the same thing. It's you have to really know CLI, and there's not a way to start and stop containers easily. And then of course Docker, same thing. It's a 5 because none of everything we did there, you will literally have to manually set up yourself. Cool. And this is the last thing. So advanced options. I kind of went over this in the previous one, but having these things built in is really great. So WP CLI showed you guys can run a WP CLI command to go and delete some posts, right? But there's something even cooler in here, and this is like one of the things I'm messing with. How many people here are familiar with like NPM? All right, cool. So, and how many people here are familiar with Composer? All right, cool. So Composer, similar to NPM, is a package manager for WordPress, right? And one of the big complaints from smarmy developers is that WordPress does not include Composer. Okay, I don't see that as a problem because you can include Composer on your own. WordPress by default does not need to include Composer because then it would lose backwards compatibility and it just complicates things, right? But one of the things that I'm using now, and because I don't have a Docker on here right now, but that you may want to check out, there's something called WPPackages. Sorry about that. And what WPPackages does, similar to, and actually I could probably just grab this and let's just give this a whirl. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll do this. We'll do it live. All right. Cool. So, so I'm going to go to this directory. Like I'm in the directory right now. And I'll do pwd to show you guys. I'm in this. That's my project sandbox, right? But we want to go to my WPMYC, right? Which is under. And we'll go cd WPMYC app public. And in the root directory, right? And I'm going to go here and just do touch composer.json. So I'm creating a JSON file, and I'll edit my composer.json, right? Now, again, people who are familiar with WP CLI, or not WP, with NPM, this is a composer file, a JSON file, right? So like similar package.json, you composer.json. And what it's actually doing here is it's going and saying, require these plugins. The AWS SDK, Akismet, Yoast SEO, and I have no idea what that theme is, right? I'm going to actually remove the AWS SDK because that's just like bigger than I need. So you go and write this file. So you literally, let's say that you have a set of plugins that you use on every website, right? And you know, like I want this, I want this, I want et cetera, right? You just go and put those as require. And of course you have to read the documentation. And then in the CLI, this WP packages tool simply knows where to go and look for, like, you notice I like have that laundry list of plugins. I'm just gonna run, let me just make sure that it's in here. Yep, Composer JSON's there. I do Composer install. And see how it says updating dependencies? Styling to space, so it's gonna take a second. And what it's doing is, it's going and grabbing those plugins from those repositories, automatically adding them to my WP content folder. And then if I want, it will add them to my theme folder. It will, and then if you can even modify your WP Composer with WP CLI and write a custom script. Yeah, and you can see it doing it right there. And it will even activate the plugins. And you can make it with an encrypted key, so it'll automatically add the license keys and all this other stuff, right? And so now, when I go back to the website that we just created, this like WPMYC, those two plugins are installed. So how many times have you guys gone in and you're like, add plugin, add plugin, add plugin? You literally make that single Composer file and include it with every single project you work in. And so if you work with a developer and you're like, I recommend these plugins, or like, what should I install? Was it this one or this one? Here's a Composer file, run Composer install. And Composer is included with Flywheel, and you can set it with desktop server, etc. That's a power move. So that's like really, like, check out WP packages, but it's really, really slick. Again, like Xdebug, live reload. So this is like the beauty of working locally. So I'm going to visit this site, right? You guys can see this as just like a standard 2019 theme. I'm going to edit the theme, so anyone who's a developer, I apologize. I know I'm supposed to use a child theme. I'm just demonstrating. So I'm going to go to my theme. I think it's what, 2019?
Yeah.
So I don't write anymore. I just type the first letter in tab. So, all right. So, so if anyone hasn't seen this, this is one of the most like awesome things you can do working locally. So it's local.proxy. And again, this is at the end. This is like I created a bunch of links, so you don't. I'm not gonna like just leave you hanging. Proxy, and it's. I have to remember this command. Sorry, like I literally write these. I don't remember all this, by the way, guys. Don't think that you have to remember this. Just remember what you have to Google. Torque mag browser sync. I just remember those words. And it is, which again, this is in the slides when I post them later today. It is a single command. Yep, flag proxy. Got it. Do. Hold on, so we're gonna start the server. Browser sync. Let me go back. Give me 1 second. Start proxy. That's what I forgot. All right. That's why you don't do it live, guys, because you will look like an idiot. And got it. So annoyingly, it's going to open Chrome because Chrome is usually my browser preference, but Chrome like really eats my battery, so I'm going to quit that. And I'm just going to go. So you guys see here, localhost 3000, and what this is doing is it's proxying to this site. So if you guys see this little thing, it's like connected, right? And the benefit of that is, right, is I can do what I said before, which is coding at the speed of thought. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I'll look for 2019. Perfect. And I'm going to just open in my development environment or my IDE or whatever. And I'm just going to do something, again, don't edit real themes. We're just going to do something stupid. And I don't even know if this is going to work because this like might be like registered somewhere else. I'm just going to go to the top of the theme and like put in, actually I'll put it at the end. So a lot of the times when you're working on a theme, right, you have to constantly save. Like this is how I normally work. I would go and say like, type something, save, refresh. Type something, save, refresh, right? With live reload, I can do border 1 pixel, solid, red, just something ugly, right? So what I'm doing is that CSS command, I'm just saying like wrap everything in a border of red, right? And when I go back to here, do you guys notice like it went like that?
Yeah.
Like I just went back. I'm gonna comment it out, go back, and it live reloaded. So think about, you have 2 screens, you're typing your code, and that page will literally like refresh in milliseconds. So again, coding at the speed of thought. And that's like you can't do that on a live server. So that's like one of the big, like that's kind of like the magic like of local. Another thing, SSH, like, you know, being SSH in the box, advanced options, and then domain mapping. You have no idea like how annoying it is to try to, like right now, if you want to go and change a domain on a local install, what I love about Flywheel, you right click and you change the domain depending on the size of the database. It could take like 5 minutes, it could take 30 minutes sometimes, but it automatically will do a domain rewrite for your whole database. And desktop server does it as well for a domain change. But again, like instead of you having to know how to code that stuff, you could change your local domain. And you can even do live link if you're on like a local server. Desktop server does this as well. You can do a live link and enable it and share it with someone in your office so they don't have to touch your computer with their lunch Cheeto finger hands or whatever. Yeah. Cool. So on my ratings, I would say like MAMP, WAMP, they're like a 4 because you have to set it all up again. Desktop server, local by Flywheel, a lot of those features are built in. WP Engine, DevKit, same thing. It includes Composer, it includes WPCLI, it includes NPM. You don't have to figure out how to learn any of those things and destroy your box or your computer doing that. Cool. So after this, again, go try it out. Install Flywheel, install Desktop Server, whichever one you prefer. You can try some of these tools. I'll post the slides tonight. But what to watch out for? You're running a computer inside of a computer. So your computer will literally, some people know this meme. This is an old one, but you will literally trash your computer. If you'll notice, like this computer, you can't feel it, like because you're over there, but I'm running 2 instances, and this thing is like super hot right now. And my battery is like down to like 50%. So like running all these background services, it will eat your battery and your computer alive. But the thing too to remember is you can turn your Wi-Fi off. You don't realize how much stuff is going on, like Dropbox and all those things. So you turn your Wi-Fi off, and because you don't need it anymore, you have a local environment. And like I said, promise those resources, those will all be in there. These links, these are all my favorite free stuff, and they will tell you how to use everything that I recommended. And that is it. Questions?
A couple of things. One of the environments I've used is called Laravel, which
For like Laravel and stuff, right?
well, I think it's related to it,
Yep.
and I'm not going to pretend to really know.
Yep.
I've used XAMPP, Champ, and LAMP. Most recently Laravel, and recently is 6 to 8 months ago, so I've forgotten what I saw.
Yeah.
But it's very convenient. You put up multiple sites. You can say install WordPress. You can install just a new domain without WordPress. You know, there's a lot of right click and do this.
Yep.
I don't know if it runs on a Mac. I know you're on a Mac,
Yeah.
but it's got a lot of attraction to it from what I saw, and it's not locked into Flywheel.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot. There's like the Laravel community has some. I think there's Laravel Valet, right? And I really haven't played with that. But there are, if you're more of a PHP developer, and that's what those are really great for, like using WordPress with any kind of like advanced PHP frameworks such as like Cake or Laravel or any of those. I really recommend. Those are cool to check out too. But this was more like guidelines. If you go through the slides, you don't have to use the tools that I recommend, but those are the tools that you should look for how to configure, because they're going to make you. There's like a term in military science called force multipliers. Like, so for example, like it essentially, that tool makes everyone's job easier to do. So like, for example, like a drone going and like scanning the area makes it easy for people to go and like move or do anything they need to do or deliver medical supplies, etc., right? If you have really good local environments with really good tools, your developers will perform better and you'll perform better. So for example, at our office, when I still see people downloading a plugin from GitHub and then dragging the file over and then installing and activating, I almost have an aneurysm, because I'm like, it's like watching my mom use Google, where she goes to www.google.com and then types in www.facebook.com and then hits enter and then clicks the link. I'm like, and so that from my mom, that for me is what, when I see developers still manually doing that, because our developers, we don't, you want to get slowed down by dragging and dropping and like things misconfigured. This makes it a lot easier, and then, you save your tokens because you're not, you're not blowing up a live site.
Two other comments. The things you had for migration, there's another one that came out fairly recently, a plugin called WP Vivid.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them out there.
Which I have been using all-in-one WP migration a lot.
Right.
Even, staging the live and back and forth. But WP Vivid gets away from some of the file size issues that all-in-one migration has.
Right.
The other thing, just about local installations in general, I ran across at least one case where a plugin doesn't work if it's on local, and that was Jetpack.
So Jetpack, they finally have a warning now. It says, is this a local install? Click yes or no. And so that for me too, as a developer, I look for plugins that support multiple environments. So there's a great analytics plugin called Monster Insights, right? And it like pre-configures like a basic Google Analytics setup, etc. It's really cool, but it did not support multiple environments. So what would happen was, if I wanted to test it on QA or test it locally, just to kind of check out tracking and stuff, it would like not recognize a license key, it wouldn't know that they were associated, and it was like really annoying. Whereas something like WP Migrate DB Pro, they charge you license per
Live site.
live site. Yeah, so it will recognize that like live site, QA, dev, and then like local, it will count those 4 environments as one site. And it recognizes and that's really, again, because the guys from Delicious Brains are developers, right? Where I'd argue the Monster Insights guys, they're more building like for small business products. They're not really building, but I try to get feedback like that. And then that, you're right, like it's weird when if a plugin doesn't work locally, I actually will never use it again, because I actually installed a plugin recently they were evaluating where I had to like and I didn't even know this was allowed in the WordPress directory. I installed the plugin, and then I had to verify my email address to get the plugin to work. And I was like, deleted, and that was it. Like I'm not. Why did I verify my email address to like use your plugin? That is not how this was worked. Yeah.
Is there a tutorial on using the files from Updraft to put it onto Flywheel?
To take an updraft file and put it in a Flywheel?
Is there a tutorial on that?
Yeah, if you just type updraft local by Flywheel, I mean, that's the one thing about the WordPress community, and all the tools that I covered are easily Googleable. Like, had I covered something like Laravel Valet, you wouldn't be able to Google it after. So most of the stuff that I recommend, they're like really easy to Google. So just like take anything that I put up here and cross the words and you'll get stuff.
Did I understand you correctly that this Monster Insights will tell you which plugins do not work with local?
No. Monster Insights doesn't work locally. That's all. It doesn't, it's an analytics plugin. It doesn't actually tell you what will work.
I see. Is there any way to know in advance, if I have a bunch of plugins, which ones will work or will not work with Flywheel?
No, you just got to pull the whole thing down. Because they would never know, because there's like some 100,000 plugins out there. There's no way they can maintain that database. But
a good guess can be if it says if the tested with version of WordPress lags a lot behind the current one.
I'm sorry, say.
You know how plugins in the marketplace say tested with
Yes.
and then a version of WordPress? In practice, ones that work locally almost always get tested with the latest version.
Okay.
Because I think automatic, I don't know what's actually happening. I think they might be testing them themselves. And ones that break locally will often lag many versions behind. Not always, but often.
It's kind of in general.
yeah. Any other questions?
WP Rig, do you recommend it, and are there any conflicts with what we went over?
You can use WP Rig with any of these. Yeah, so WP Rig, for anyone who's not aware, it's essentially, it is a development kit for building PWAs or progressive web apps with WordPress. So it is it's a starter kit. So the same way that you have like Create Gutenblock, but this is for accelerated mobile page progressive web applications, which is a Google standard that they're developing.
We have a video on our website.
Yeah, and we just had one of the guys from Google literally was here presenting on it. And so if you check out the video, I think from like 2 months ago, he was here and talked about WP Rake and how to use it. But you can use any of these.
Actually, I do want to say one thing based on what you were saying. When you are developing locally and on a server, do make sure that your PHP versions are the same, your WordPress versions are the same. That can cause a conflict. You can have a plugin that works locally, and then it takes down your server because you're running 2 different versions of PHP or whatever.
Right, and that's another thing too. Like what I like is sometimes I get a lot of clients that like they want to be moved off GoDaddy, and GoDaddy's WordPress 5, and so a lot of the plugins that they use, they still work fine. And then I'll pull them a local install, make sure it matches GoDaddy, but then when I upgrade to I'll swap to PHP 7, all the plugins break. But what's great is I just switch back to 5.6 and I can see, and then I can go and diagnose and update and do what I need to do.
So I'm not a developer. I have a client who has a very old WordPress site, and I put Elementor on it, so it looks very pretty now, but it's a nightmare. It's just really old. We can't update their PHP. I got some help at the last help desk, but it's something that needs to be resolved. So in this case, like I feel like it should just start over. So Flywheel, would that be the right application to just sort of?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to start over either, because like the one thing I did was like, so recently I worked with a client, she was on some weird server and she had a theme that required 8 add-on plugins to just function. Like, so there was like a menu add-on, there was an SEO add, all these add-ons. But then she also had, she had a slider add-on from the theme, Revolution slider, and then another slider. And so what I did was I pulled down the whole site on a local instance, and then I did an inventory via CLI. I was able to get a list of all the plugins. And then in a spreadsheet, I just was like, what's the functionality of these plugins? And you're not a developer, so you don't have to do it this way, like, because what you need to do is go and look at how are these plugins being used and what pages are they being used on, and you'll find, like I had a client, she was using the form extension from this ridiculous theme, but then she also had Gravity Forms, but then she also had like Elementor Forms. And so I was like, well, let's just like for forms, we're gonna use Gravity Forms. For this, we're gonna use that. And so you can, and what's nice with Flywheel, or any kind of local instance, you can turn plugins on and off and see what works and doesn't work. So then what you can do is slowly start to peel back the onion and work down to what you need. And that way too, like at the end of it, you don't have to do it on a live site, but you can show the client like at the end and say, look, like you had 45 plugins, 30 you didn't know what they did, and like if you're like you're leaving yourself exposed to more because you have to update more plugins, you have to manage more plugins, and then pare it down, and then if it still works at 15 plugins, that's kind of a win, right? But there are other tools out there too, like to analyze, like in WPCLI, you can get a report of all your plugins that are installed and like which one's out of date, et cetera.
Their plugins are pretty clean, it's
Yeah.
for the host. I think.
Yeah, so even then like that,
All the hosts that we've never heard of.
I've had that happen where I will take a site off like, Johnny Mr. Host guy, and I will take the site off his server where he swears it's like configured to be amazing, and then I'll run it like on like a local and show the client like how fast everything is, and they'll be like, wow, this is like worlds apart. I'm like, yeah, that's because like it's PHP 5.2 and like it's an old thing and it's a shared server, and so sometimes it's good to demo even too to show a client how it should behave.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly.
So, I think we all have to get kicked out here in 10 minutes. So, cool. Thank you, everyone. I will tweet the slides and I will post them to the meetup comments. It was a pleasure. Thank you for everyone coming out.